You don't describe the future you see the future you describe. Let me say that again. You don't describe the future you see the future you describe. I came across these words after I'd had a furious argument with my wife. And let me tell you how. The night before, we'd been to a dinner party, and the dinner party had been arranged to celebrate a couple emigrating to Australia. Now, it was an extraordinary evening. You know, the champagne corks were popped, people were raising their glasses. Well done, Bill and Sue, you're off to the first world where things work. Don't forget about us here in the third world where nothing works. And then we sat down to dinner and we had one of these kind of awful South African conversations. We talked about crime, and we talked about health, we talked about education, and we talked about potholes, and we talked about government. And during the conversation, I learned a whole lot of stuff that I didn't know before. I learned that our police-to-population ratio was the worst in the world. I learned that Joburg was the crime capital of the world. I learned that our schools were the most violent in the world. I learned that our education standards were dropping. I learned that there are more doctors leaving the country than are graduating. I learned all this stuff. And so halfway through the dinner, I said to my wife, I'm out of here, and we left. Now that was not a hell of a clever thing to have done, because first of all, they were her friends, and second of all, she'd prepared the pudding. But we left, and we had a flaming argument going home in the car, and thank goodness for modern technology, I was able to SMS her the next morning to regain entry into the family bedroom. But it got me thinking a lot about what had happened the previous evening, because I really did get angry. But I didn't get angry so much at the people who were slagging the country off. I got angry because I couldn't argue back. I just didn't have any facts at my disposal. I couldn't challenge any of the things that were said while everybody sat around the table sort of sagely nodding their heads as one bad fact was trotted out after another. So it was during that day that I came across the second statement. We don't see things as they are, we see them as we are. And I thought, what kind of South Africans are we that we can spend a whole night slagging off the country? I have to tell you that I was on my own most of Sunday, so I had a lot of time to think. And then I came across another statement that all truth passes through three phases. First, it's ridiculed. Secondly, it's violently opposed. And thirdly, it becomes self-evident. And I thought to myself, what is the truth of this country? You know, do I understand the truth? Do we understand the truth? Now remember, this was in 2002, when the rand was nudging 16 to the dollar, the pound was 21 to the dollar, and there was a new adverb invented in the South African version of the English language, the Zimbabweanification of South Africa. Watch out, just a matter of time before we become another banana republic. And so it was quite a bad time. And so during the course of the afternoon, we got a little rule in our house that we aren't allowed to fight over something for more than 24 hours. So during the course of the afternoon, my wife came with a peace offering with a cup of rooibos tea and a yogurt biscuit, which is my favorite biscuit. And she said to me, listen, if you feel so strongly about this, why don't you write a book? Which is like a standard kind of throwaway line. But I thought, you know, that's what I'll do. I'm going to write a book tomorrow called South Africa, the Good News. Now, there was two problems. First of all, I knew nothing about the publishing industry. And secondly, I didn't know whether there was any good news or not. But I decided that was what I was going to do. So I went off to a couple of publishing houses, and the first publisher said to me, South Africa, the what? So I said, the good news. They said, no, we don't deal in fiction. And then the second guy said, so how long is that book going to be? Half a page. So I realized I was going to get off to a fairly bad start, but I also realized that I couldn't write it myself. So I approached 45 South Africans to write chapters, people who knew their business and knew of the progress. So I approached people like Dr. Olive Shazana to talk about leadership, Cyril Ramaphosa to talk about entrepreneurship, Trevor Manuel to talk about the economy, Cheryl Carolus to talk about tourism, etc. And in 6 months, I turned this project around, and I had a book on the shelves called South Africa, The Good News, with 27 chapters covering the broad socio-political and economic developments. But it started for me an incredible process of learning. I learned as these chapters came in that in fact our police to population ratio isn't amongst the worst in the world, it's amongst the best. I learned that Johannesburg isn't the most violent city in the world. There are hundreds of cities with higher crime levels. I learned that our schools are not the most violent in the world. There are 12 schools in Europe where kids report higher levels of violence than our children do. I learned that our varsity standards are not dropping, that in fact 10 of the 23 universities in this country are in the top 7% of universities globally. I learned that there aren't more doctors leaving the country than are graduating. It really started an incredible journey of countering all this negative stuff that I'd heard, but I also learned a lot of very positive stuff. That in the Global Competitiveness Report, South Africa is ranked 1 in terms of its auditing and reporting standards. Our Joburg Stock Exchange is ranked 1 in the world in terms of the way it's managed and regulated. Our banks are ranked 2nd in the world. Our tourism is one of the fastest growing in the world, etc. So it set me on a journey, and it got me wondering, what kind of narratives are there out there? And I sort of fell upon the idea that there's an informed narrative where people know the good and the bad. There's an uninformed narrative where people live on rumor, conventional wisdoms, and shoddy journalism. As long as the sentence ends in worst in the world, that has to be true. And then I thought that there was a sort of third area of what you could call prejudice narrative, where people have these awful kind of generalizations and racial stereotyping. So you hear people saying things like, they don't respect life, or they are corrupt, or they don't care about the future. Like, who's they, for God's sake? But, and then I thought, why is this? And I sort of fell upon the idea that our media really does obsess with bad news. Like, good news is no news. If it bleeds, it leads. There's that. And then I fell upon the idea that one of the dangers that faces all of us is the danger of the single story. The very first TED talk I saw was a TED talk by Chirunanda Adichie, who spoke about the danger of the single story out of Africa. The 4 Ds: death, disaster, disease, and despair. And she talked about how, as a middle-aged Nigerian, a middle-class Nigerian, she went across to America to study, and her roommate said to her, you are in USA, this here, bath. This where you wash, no washing in river. We have no crocodiles in river, but we have pollution. And then I sort of also thought about the way forward in terms of because I think our broadcasting corporation has lost its way in terms of the strategy for broadcasting. So why, in fact, I even came up with my own little statement that the facts speak for themselves, journalists, conventional wisdoms and rumors speak for each other. But, and in this context, you may have read that article by Ferial Haffajee, where she talks about the narrative of dysfunction in this country is personally nauseating. So it brings me to the point of the narrative. Why is an informed narrative so important? And I think it's important for 3 reasons. I think an informed narrative is important because it enables you to understand the good, or to celebrate the good and confront the bad. And I think we put ourselves in so much a better position if we are able to confront the bad because we know of the good. I had an Afrikaans master at school who used to mix up his metaphors all the time. He used to say things like, you 3 forwards must hunt in pairs. But His favorite saying to me was, "Kerels, you must be careful of change, eh? It can happen behind your back, right in front of your eyes." And I think in South Africa, a lot of that happens. You know, we have an unbelievably powerful NGO sector, 100,000 NGOs. And you've heard a lot of the kind of work that they're doing today. So I think that's the first reason why an informed narrative is important. I think the second reason is that it informs the prophecy. We all know the laws of the self-fulfilling prophecy. So it informs the prophecy. So if the prophecy is one of understanding the good and celebrating the good and knowing about the bad, I think that puts you in a good position to envisage a future of hope and of progress and of opportunity. And I think the third reason is that if you have an informed narrative, it is the narrative you'll pass on to your children and the generations that follow. And I think that's the very most important thing we can do as proud South Africans and as proud Africans. Thank you.